Hello, this is Dr. Flight, and this is a video lecture that will spend some time focusing on the product life cycle, the market development index, and then the market share index. These are all tools that we can use to help us better understand a particular product market space or an industry and market, and how we perform in that, and how profitable and how advantageous that product market looks to us, with the potential of either entering that product market or being a firm that participates in it. So again, this is a presentation on the product life cycle, the market development index, and the market share index. Okay, we're going to spend some time thinking about the product life cycle, and in particular what we want to do is consider what demand for a product looks like over a long period of time. When we think about demand curves, we often think about them in a macro perspective. So for this example, we have personal computers and the demand for personal computers over a long period of time from an industry perspective. And so one of the things we want to look at would be, or consider at least, is what the potential market would be for the product and the current demand for the product at this given point in time. So this illustration suggests that there's a total market demand for this product of 350 million units, and that would be per time period. And right now, it does not appear as though the market is completely saturated. It appears as though there's still some potential left to be had, and that overall current demand is somewhat less than what the eventual potential for the product category would be. So if you're a new entrant into this area, or this product, you would probably be a little concerned because it doesn't appear as though there's a lot of new growth to be had, but that a lot of the growth in the industry has already been exhausted over a long period of time. So having an understanding of the dynamics of the demand curve, market potential, and your own market share within an industry are things that we want to think about and look at as we move forward, and particularly when we look at product life cycles. So if we look at these issues a little bit closer, we can map out in three distinct areas some different aspects of the demand curve that influence the overall profitability and position the firm may have within an industry. One thing that we know is that as products sell over time, as they diffuse into a market, volume will begin to grow predictably, yet as more competitors enter the industry, and more options to the consumer become available to them, prices start to decline and start to lower over time. So the curve continues up like this initially, but one of the things that happens is price starts to decline because of increased competition and the maturity of the product, commoditization threats and things like that. And at the same time, costs for the firm go down, but they go down at a slower rate than the price does. So slowly over time, as the product diffuses and spreads throughout the marketplace, as the product moves into the growth stage of the product life cycle and then into the maturity stage, margins become harder and harder to obtain. Margins get squeezed because the average per unit price tends to go down. Customers pay less for a product after it's matured, and that reduction of price and revenue coming in is not offset by reductions in cost. So that's one of the challenges and one of the things that we think about here as we move forward. So in this example or illustration, we have volume in units, which is measured by the demand curve. And again, this is typically drawn for an industry. This is an industry level curve. Within this curve here, our specific firm will have some market share, so some portion of the overall sales will be the ones that we're responsible for. Then we have profit, which will be a function of our margin. So profit will margin will be declining, but as sales increase, we might not necessarily notice that impact. Finally, the last piece of the puzzle on this page deals with marketing and sales expenses. We know that prices again tend to decrease as time moves on, margins tend to fall. Our marketing and sales expenses will generally ramp up and grow as the product diffuses in the marketplace, as the product life cycle continues on. And one of the reasons why it grows so rapidly right in here is because you're typically defending your product from new entrants into the marketplace. So it might be that we entered the industry, we entered with a product, we started offering a product, and then other firms jumped in as well and started to offer products similar to ours. And so now we have to defend ourselves in an effort to retain market share, grow new consumers, and so on and so forth. So these factors, when we think about our expenses that we have to incur to bring the product to market, and then subtracting those expenses out from gross product, we're left with our net marketing contribution. That becomes a challenge when our expenses continue to grow, yet our margins may cause some sensitivity in regards to profit. This can be also illustrated in another example here when we look at the longer curve of the product life cycle from introduction through the decline stage. We can see how net marketing contribution really takes off, but then at some point here levels off and becomes declining at this particular point here. So in an early stage of the product life cycle, the net marketing contribution is negative because we're having to invest a lot in the product launch. We're also having to repay or recoup our expenses and sunk costs due to the research and development of the new product. As the product moves through the product life cycle, the net marketing contribution begins to grow, but then eventually flattens out as sales also flatten out as well. One of the things that's really interesting to think about when we talk about product life cycle charts is that they're typically not static. They typically don't act out in a perfect curve from start to finish, because there are a lot of dynamic features that happen over the course of time. One of which is that when a product is launched, new variations of the product become developed, and new technologies are developed so that new versions of the product will eventually come out. So oftentimes we start out with a curve that looks traditional, like this curve here, and then at some point an innovator reintroduces the product with some new technology, and so instead of the curve coming down as it would naturally do like this, the curve extends up because a new innovation in essence creates a new product life cycle curve. So the new innovation takes place, the life cycle curve basically starts over again. But if you add the sales from the new product to the sales of the old product, then you see that for the product category, sales continue to go up. So this would be like an extension, a second and third and fourth generation of the product, where the product life cycle is not allowed to go into the deep mature stage or the decline stage, because the new innovation, the new product that emerges from some technology, continues to grow the market and continues to grow product sales for it. Sometimes you'll see something like this. Here's a great example, again, from the computer industry, where we have individual products that are being launched because technology allowed different size of processors. As each processor became more and more sophisticated, it introduced more capabilities and more consumers to the overall buying market. So the potential, in other words, of the industry grew as new innovations were developed. Now, the net effect of all of these incremental changes was adding on, so that the product life cycle grew in a very large way, and the entire industry grew as a whole as a result of all these individual products. Now, it should also be noted, and rather interestingly, that when a new product is introduced like this, the effect that it has is it kills off products that already exist, or it has that potential anyways. So if you're a company and you offer a second or third generation product, then what you're in essence doing is cannibalizing sales from the first generation product, and you're trying to switch your customers to the new product that you're now offering. So that's certainly something that we would look to do if we want to continue to grow the product life cycle so that it never really reaches the late mature or the decline stage. That's a strategy that we'll want to engage in very often. So this curve, this product life cycle curve, then is not static. We can measure it and we can estimate it for many, many years in the future. But because of a lot of different dynamics that happen among competitors and happen with our consumers, what we forecast today for 20 years from now probably won't be very accurate because of new product innovations and so forth. So we actually look at what things can influence that curve, and we have a fair degree of control, and we have a fair degree as marketers and product developers and business people to have an influence on how this curve is shaped and what we can do to manage it. So from the consumer side, this curve and the shape of the curve is dictated a lot of times by how risk averse the customer is, and what types of influences or forces impact them in their buying decision. So for instance, if the customer is convinced that they have a strong need for the product, they're going to buy the product sooner, and they'll be less price resistant and so forth. If there's a lot of risk they feel is associated with the product, then they'll be less likely to buy the product, and that will slow down the rate of growth or the rate of demand for the product. Other factors, when they're buying the product, can they buy it on their own, or are they influenced by other people in the buying process? Can other people observe the product in use? Can they try the product in advance? If a consumer can try the product in advance, they're much more likely to buy the product. So that enhances or speeds up the rate of diffusion in the marketplace. Other aspects that have an influence on the shape of the demand curve of the product life cycle curve have to do with whether we can build relative advantage into the product. So our new product comes out, does it solve our customers' problems significantly better in a better way than what they're currently using? Is there significant advantage to them using our product over what they're currently using? Is our product more affordable? Is it easy to use? Does it outperform what they're currently using to solve their problem? Is it readily available to them? These are all things that from a marketing management perspective, we build into our marketing plan and into our product. And all of these things help shape the product lifecycle curve so that sales take off faster, and more of the market is exposed to the product quicker than what they otherwise would be. So developing and delivering a complete solution to a customer's need relative to the product lifecycle curve has a lot of different pieces involved with it. The perception of the product by the customer, but then also how we manage the product's features as well influences the product lifecycle too, and whether we develop new products that ultimately take the place of our old products in second and third and fourth generation products as well, that has a big influence on the shape of that curve. If we put this together, if we think about how we can influence the product lifecycle curve, we can think about what the customer sees and then what we can do as well. So we have these customer issues, and we also have product issues as well. And so if a product comes out and is not something that customers would readily adopt quickly, then and we'll look at this cell down here at the bottom, and if we are unable to create a product that has a lot of relative advantage, that's really motivating for the consumer, that's really easy for them to use and so forth, then it's going to be very slow to be adopted. And so the takeoff period in the product lifecycle curve will be very, very slow. In the other end of the spectrum, if the product is very likable by the consumer, if it fits into their lifestyle, if it's easy to use, if there's a ton of relative advantage, if it's inexpensive, things of that nature, then we're going to see a lot more products up in this upper quadrant here. And the product lifecycle curve will be very steep to begin with, and it will exhaust itself rather quickly from a time perspective. So things that fall into this category up here, one classic example would be some type of a fad item, an item that is popular for a very short period of time, and the market becomes saturated very, very rapidly, and that's because it's a very accessible type of a product and customers really want it. Okay, so this is a brief kind of discussion on product lifecycle concepts and what is all about the product lifecycle. As we move forward, we want to spend a little bit of time thinking about the product development index. Now, as we look at this, we've talked about this idea of potential and the potential market size. And so we want to think about what number of units or what number of consumers would be out in the marketplace that could potentially buy our product. And then we want to look at how much of that potential is being served at this point in time. So we have two things we're thinking about here simultaneously. Number one, the maximum number of consuming units. So that would be if we took everybody who's in the market segment that could possibly buy the product. And these could be consuming units. So these could be individual people, these could be households, these could be businesses. So how many total consuming units are in the market segment to buy this type of product? So in this example, again, we're the personal computers. The estimate of consuming units, of potential consuming units, is 4.5 billion units. That would be 4.5, because this is in, the scale here is in millions, so 4.5 billion units is what it looks like here. Now, Um, that's not everybody who will buy, because some people won't have access to the product, some people won't be able to afford the product, and things like that. Those are the people who would like to have a computer, but not necessarily everybody who will realistically be somebody we could sell to. Okay, so we have consuming units, and then we have to adjust this consuming units number down to something that would be a potential market so that they could actually buy our product. Okay, so we look at people who, the percentage of consuming units who could afford our product. So this would be kind of this idea called a buying ceiling. Buying ceiling is a percentage of individuals who would be willing to pay the price that we're offering our product for. And then we have a purchase rate. Now in this case, the purchase rate is 20%. Basically what this is saying, the time period here is 1 year. So this is basically saying that the rate of repurchase would be one every 5 years. So 20% is once every 5 years. And if you think about people buying a computer, that probably makes sense. If it's an item that somebody would buy once every 2 or 3 months, this number would be, like 3, 4, 500%, something like that, depending on how many times a year they would purchase the product. Then we have the purchase quantity. People buy one PC at a time in this case, and then we'll look at average price here in just a second. But basically what we're going to do here is we take our consuming units and then multiply our consuming units by these different percentages, by 50%, by 20%, and then the purchase quantity per year. And we get this number 450 million. Okay, so now what we're going to call this is our market potential. This is going to be the very top part or the maximum amount of consumers that would buy the product, and it'd be the area under the curve in a product life cycle curve. It would represent the number of units under the curve in a product life cycle curve. So we have this number, potential units. Now, we don't sell to all of these units until the market's completely saturated. So the other number that we want to focus on here on this particular page is the current demand for the product. So the worldwide millions of users right now in this illustration is 325 million. So 325 million customers are being served out of a potential of 450 million. And if we take this and we simply divide 325 by 450, then we get 72%. So basically 72% of our market is saturated, is being serviced. And so this illustration here, we have a little dot which represents roughly 72%. And so if you think about us traveling a long time and consumers being satisfied with our product and buying our product, you could say that the market is roughly 72% saturated. And so there would be 28% more market to be had, if you will, or potential left to be serviced. So adding one more element, average price here, the last thing that we can look at here on this page would be a dollar figure for how much potential this market actually has. If we sell our product at $650, and again, this is the buying ceiling number, so this is like $650. If we were to lower our price, then the buying ceiling would go up. And we would have a larger market potential. If we raised our price, then the buying ceiling would go down and our market potential would go down as well. But this illustration has our price set at $650. Multiplying that by the number of units we have, we get a market potential in dollars. So we have a market potential in units, then we also have a market potential in dollars. in terms of what the potential is for sales within a period of time. So then again, this is like in a yearly basis. So on an annual or yearly basis, these would be the number of units sold, and this would be the industry-wide market potential. Now, keep in mind also that even though there's 325 million units sold out of a potential 450 million units, this is an industry-wide total. This doesn't mean that we as a firm are seeing these types of numbers from a sales perspective, because we only share a portion of the market. So once we calculate and figure in our market share, then we can try to understand in a little bit of a better sense what this means to us in terms of market size. Okay, so the 72% then, the 72 number is the market development index. And so as we move forward and we calculate the market development index, then what we want to be able to make sure we know how to do is calculate market potential. And we need to do from market research, we need to understand how many units are sold within the time period that we're focused on. So we take our current demand for the products, current sales, divide it by market potential. And to make an index, we want to index it to 100. So we multiply by 100. So we essentially just take the percentage out of percentage terms and make it into a 72. So it's 72%, but it's also the index of 72. So think of the market development index as a percentage of total market that could potentially be reached and sold to in the market, but it's the percentage that is being sold to up to this point. If you have a higher MDI, then it's a less attractive market to be in. Okay, so because the higher the MDI suggests that the market's more saturated than a lower MDI. So that's how you want to interpret that and think about that. Here's another illustration. Many new markets function well below their market potential because so many customers haven't entered them yet. So again, we're looking at the product life cycle curve. This is a cumulative density function, a CDF here, where we look at it's the product life cycle curve, only we add cumulative users over a period of time. So the shape of the curve looks like this. And as time progresses, more and more users buy the product. So we have innovators and we have early adopters and the early majority consumers. And what we see here is up to a point in time, these consumers have bought the product or adopted the product or started using it, but we have all these other consumers that have not purchased this yet. Now, oftentimes this is a function of time, but it could also be a function of those other aspects of the demand curve, of the product life cycle curve we talked about earlier. It could be that they're not aware of the product. It could be that the product does not have a lot of relative advantage. It could be that the product's hard to use, or that the consumers have a difficult time understanding it, or maybe it's not available to them, or they can't try it before they use it, and so on. So if you go back to think about why people buy the products and what could speed up or slow down the product life cycle curve, this comes into play here in trying to reach the rest of the market, or market members or consumers that haven't bought the product yet. So we have kind of a point in time here where the product is sold and now we want to sell to the rest of the market. And that's one of our goals moving forward. Okay, so the last concept that we're going to spend some time talking about then will be the market share index. We talked about the market development index, which is an issue that deals with the industry and industry potential for sales and the product life cycle in particular. That's a strong emphasis that we have for it and with it there. But our next feature here we'll talk about is another measure called the market share performance, the index itself. And basically what we want to do here is we want to estimate market share, and then we'll multiply it by 100 again to get an index. But there are a number of ways to calculate market share. Of course, we can look at our sales, and we can divide that by the industry total sales, and that would give us a clear picture for market share. But suppose that we don't have a product in the market yet, and so we don't have any sales figures as of yet, and we want to try to estimate what our potential market share would be. So in this case, what we want to do is some surveying and gather some information from customers, and we want to tie this information directly to the buying process that they would go through in order to purchase our product. So from consumer behavior, we understand that consumers go through a series of steps before they actually make a purchase decision. So awareness, for instance, is typically a very good first step. In order for a customer to buy your product, they have to know about your product. If they don't know about your product, then they can't evaluate it, they can't try it, they can't consider it and put it into their consideration set. So what we say here is we take like a market and we ask, well, what percentage of the market would know or be aware of our product? And that's a function of advertising. So we want to be able to advertise our product, and that's how we would get that number. We would measure again consumers' likelihood that they would have been known or exposed to media or advertising associated with our product. Next, we would say, well, if they're aware of our product, what is the likelihood they'll be attracted to it and they will like it enough to move forward and keep it in their consideration set? Again, this would be 75% of those who are aware of the product then we estimate would be attracted to the product. The next step is assuming that our price is okay. Sometimes price is like a hurdle. So as long as you're within the hurdle or you make the benchmark for the consumer, then you would be good there. But again, we estimate what percentage of the market would be satisfied with the price that we are asking and be able to afford it. Then we have those who claim they will buy the product. Then we have those who actually do buy the product. So going through a series of behavioral steps that consumers walk through when they make a purchase, we can take these from a cumulative perspective, multiply them together. So if we multiply 45% times 75% times 50% times 79% times 75%, those 5 percentages multiplied together yield 10%, which is in essence a market share number. What we're saying is that if we launch this product and these numbers hold up, then we can expect to capture roughly 10% of the market share. So this is called a market share tree, and one of the reasons why it's called a tree is because we have some leakage, or we have consumers who we cannot capture because of these subsequent stages. So, we know 55% of the market will not be our customers because they don't know about it. And so if I can improve awareness, then all of my numbers will benefit because I'm knocking out some of this 55%. Maybe you can move that down like to 40 or 30%, and that will have a huge impact on this whole process. Okay, so that's the concept of estimating market share using this method. There are other methods, of course, to estimate market share, but the market share index is one method. So we have formally here the market share index, where we multiply the percentages of awareness, attractive, price, intention to buy, and purchase rate, and we get this percentage. Now again, if we want to create and make an index out of this, we multiply this number by 100. So the index here for this would be 13.3 instead of 13.3%. But that's just kind of a semantic type of a thing. We know that market share is oftentimes expressed in a percentage type of an area. So we can move forward and we can try to build on this as well. One of the handy features here that we can also talk about is looking at our market share index, which is an estimate of future performance to actual market share. And so as we try to estimate our market share, then once we begin to produce a product and sell a product, we can compare our estimate to our actual estimate, actual behavior and actual market share that we have. So we have these different features: product awareness, attractiveness, price, intention to buy, market share, that all fall into our calculation. What we want to be able to do is try to determine what an optimal level for each of these would be, and base our planning perspective on what our optimal performance would be compared to our current performance. So if our current performance is 10% market share, we can say, well, look, we can do a better job boosting awareness because we can develop advertising and so on, and that will help us out. Right? So if I do that, maybe I can get that number up to 80%, and I can close our performance gap from what we are doing to what we could be doing. And we could also do that in these other areas as well. And from a managerial perspective, breaking down the process of buying allows us to do this. So if we use market share estimates based only on sales, from our firm sales to industry sales, we don't really understand what's driving sales all the time, but this gives us a better perspective on the different pieces that are driving sales. It may be that price might be fine, and price here, I can only improve price by another 10%. So from a managerial perspective, I may not want to focus on that first. I might want to focus on this first because we know it's the first thing that happens in the decision-making process, awareness, and it's the area that we have the most opportunity to gain market share or to influence market share on. So now breaking this down then, looking at the market share potential, we really like to focus on how we can make managerial changes that will most influence market share at the end of the day. Bringing this all together, we have an opportunity to look at market share and the market development and the market share aspects of our industry. Remember, market development focuses on the industry level approach to how the degree to which the market is saturated from an industry perspective. The share development focus really talks about how we are as a firm performing within the industry. So you have two different axes here that really focus on kind of pulling these two things together. We have the industry growth expectations here. And again, the higher it is, the less attractive the industry is because it suggests there's less growth opportunity there. The lower here suggests very high growth potential, again because the product is not as diffused quite as highly. Moving this way, we have opportunities where we can grow our share. Right, so we're growing our share, or we have high share already. So if we're looking to grow, we actually want to find a product like right here. So product E, just as an example here, is in an industry where there's a lot of growth opportunity, but at the same time, there's a lot of opportunity for us to grow market share. So imagine if the industry grows, continues to become saturated through the product life cycle, there's a lot of sales to be had here. And imagine if we say double our market share, then that'd be huge. That's a big, huge opportunity right there. Think about this product right here, product C, whatever product C is. There's not a lot of growth opportunity for this product to continue to grow from an industry perspective. It's probably in the late or mature stage of the product life cycle. Also, we don't have a lot of growth opportunities left in market share that we could gather either. So basically we are the leader in the industry. We got 80 to 90% market share in that product, but it's in a dying industry or dying product category. So we're probably going to want to divest that eventually. We probably want to get out of our exposure in that product. Even though we're the leader, it's not going to yield us much potential new growth. This guy down here will. Now, you're probably familiar with this concept. You've probably seen this before if you've had a marketing class. A very common, popular model is called the BCG Growth Share Matrix, the Boston Consulting Group Growth Share Matrix. So basically what's going to happen here, the scales are flipped a little bit. The scales are flipped, but we have the growth rate for the market growth rate. So this would be like at the industry level, whether the product has a lot of growth opportunity, which would be high, or a little growth opportunity, which would be low. So again, scales are flipped here, so don't get too caught up in whether it's up or down. But so low, this would be products that have relatively high market developed indexes. Here, this would be relatively low market developed indexes, suggesting there's a lot of growth opportunity in the marketplace. So these would be products, these stars would be products in the early stages of the product life cycle. These products would be products that are probably in the mature stage of the product life cycle. When we move to the x-axis here, we have our competitive position. And really what we're looking at is share compared to other members in the product category. So other firms in the product category, if you look at our share relative to theirs, that's what we're looking at when we think about the competitive position on this particular model. So if we have a low, and again, the scales are flipped here, so don't lose sight of this. If we have a low market share, then we're probably not very competitive. Now we could do some activities to try to move ourselves in this direction, which would be good. That's something that we would want to be able to do to get up to a high market position. Okay, so these products here, sometimes we call these question marks. Sometimes these are question marks. Sometimes they're called problem children, and it's only because we don't know what to do with them. We don't know how they're going to behave. So basically what's happening is we have low market share, and that's early in the product life cycle. There's a lot of potential, but we don't have a strong market share in this product right now. So what we want to do is we want to invest money so that we build awareness, build the attractiveness of the product, and we grow our market share so that a problem child becomes a star for us. That's the goal here to be able to do. Once we're able to do that, then we continue to invest. As the product enters into the mature stage of the product life cycle, we start seeing greater and greater cash revenue from it, greater profits and so forth. Eventually the product becomes something that goes into the decline stage, and eventually becomes what we call a dog. Okay, so the BCG growth chart is something that you may very well have seen. It's been around for years and years and years, and it's been taught in marketing, in the principles of marketing classes and all the way up. But it has some direct implications to this idea of the market development index, which could be represented right here, and the share, the share index, the share development index, which would be right there. Okay, so this has been a presentation then on product life cycle, on the market development index, how to calculate it and how to use it, what it means, and then finally the share development index, and then pulling them both together so that as a manager you could use them to be able to develop a plan.